Do you be goat? Do you be goat? Do you be goat? Do you be goat? Do you be fish? Do you be fish? Do you be goat? Do you be goat? Or do you be fish? Because the goats do be goat and the fish do be fish. Do you be goat or a fish? Don't sit on the fence. Well, goat are of the land and fish are of the sea. But goat versus fish, which one do you be? Do you be goat or a fish? Meh. Do you be goat or a fish? Boom, 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 boom. Because the goats do be goat and the fish do be fish. Do you be goat or a fish? Don't sit on the fence. Now repeat, repeat after goat versus fish. Dooby 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 dooby. A dooby goat, dooby goat, dooby goat, dooby goat, or dooby fish, a dooby goat or a fish, because the goats do be goat and the fish do be fish. Do you be goat or a fish? Don't sit on the fence. Well, goat versus fish came up to me and said, a goat or a fish, which one do you be? Do you be goat or a fish? 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 Because the goats do be goat and the fish do be fish. Do you be goat or a fish? Don't sit on the fence. Because the goats do be goat and the fish do be fish. The medieval man sitter sits on the fence. But the goats do be goat and the fish do be fish. Do you be goat or a fish?
Make some noise for the goat, make some noise for the goat. Make some noise for the goat, make some noise for the goat. Celebration Thunder Tracks. Welcome again to GoatVsFish. Welcome again to GoatVsFish. This shall be a mighty versus. This is the current versus. This is the current versus. This shall be a mighty versus. Are you goat or fish? Are you goat or are you fish? This is the versus. Are you goat or are you fish? 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 This is the versus. Are you goat or are you fish? 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 Make some noise for the fish. Make some noise for the fish. See if you don't let's get check. Make some noise for the fish. See if you don't let's get check. Make some noise for the fish. See if you don't let's get check. Make some noise for the fish.
Do you be goat? Do you be goat? Do you be goat? Do you be goat?
Goat versus
Do you be
fish.
Do you be
Goat versus fish.
Because the goats do be goat and the fish do be fish. Do you be goat or a fish? Don't sit on the fence. Well, goat are of the land and fish are of the sea. But goat versus fish, which one do you be? Do you be goat or a fish?
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 Because the goats do be goat and the fish do be fish. Do you be goat or a fish?
Do you be goat or do you be fish? Are you goat or are you fish? Don't sit on the fence.
Now repeat after goat versus fish. Doobie 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 doobie.
Goat versus fish.
Doobie 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 goat, doobie goat, doobie goat, doobie goat, or doobie fish, a doobie goat or a fish, because the goats doobie goat and the fish doobie fish. Do you be goat or a fish? Don't sit on the fence. Well, goat versus fish came up to me and said, a goat or a fish, which one do you be? Do you be goat or a fish? 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 Because the goats do be goat and the fish do be fish. Do you be goat or a fish? Don't sit on the fence.
Doobie 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 goat or doobie fish.
Because the goats do be goat and the fish do be fish. The medieval fence sitter sits on the fence. But the goat do be goat and the fish do be fish. Do you be goat or a fish?
Celebration! Goat versus fish is committed to the bit. Goat versus fish is committed to the bit. Goat versus fish is committed to the bit.
Welcome again to Goat vs. Fish.
Goat versus fish is committed to 300 bits. Goat versus fish is committed to 420 bits.
This is the current versus. This is the current versus.
Goat versus fish is committed to all the bits. Goat versus fish is committed to all the bits. Welcome to Goat versus Fish. Welcome to Goat versus Fish. Another exciting versus, another celebration. Another trial and tribulation for goat and for fish. And celebration for Dragon Ballers, and celebration for 300 bits, and celebration for 420 bits, and celebration for goat and for fish. For AK Potatoes and Blasphemous who join Goat versus Fish, you may say Goat versus Fish. What is happening all around Goat versus Fish? We see, what is this pork project? Well, these are versus
from the previous verses of Goat vs. Fish, ways in which your influence influenced Goat vs. Fish. Perhaps Goat vs. Fish has gotten smaller. You never know what's happening with Goat vs. Fish. And Dragon Balls with 420 and 300 bits, we think we're going to start the verses. First, we're going to clear these old verses. We're going to clear these old verses. We're going to creation a new verses for Goat vs. Fish. We're going to take these verses. Let's group these verses. Group these verses. We're going to call this. Call this Goat vs. Fish. We shall call this. We shall call this verses. And now we shall say goodbye. And there is no good or evil bye to Psychic Pakai 12's verses. And all of these verses. And there's Fence America. There's Fence America off in the verses. There's Fence America off in the verses. There's Fence America off in the verses. Say farewell to Fence America, to Fence America. Goat and Fish. One day they will study Goat vs. Fish. One day they will study Goat vs. Fish. Yes. One day they will study Goat vs. Fish. And to prove that they will one day study Goat vs. Fish will study you. Goat vs. Fish will study you, Dragon Ballers. We're going to study you right now. By taking a picture with Goat vs. Fish. Like this. Then we take the picture of Goat vs. Fish. You shall see, you shall see. Let's trim the verses. Trim the verses just like this. A picture. A picture of your very chat on Goat vs. Fish. We take the picture of your very chat and we add it. We add it to the Instagram story of Goat vs. Fish. We give it to verses. We give it to verses. Dragon Ballers, next verses. Next verses. You say 420. 420 should have a specific trigger alert. What say you and Goat vs. Fish? What say we find a trigger alert for 420 for Goat vs. Fish? What do you say to this? What do you say to this? What do you say to this? Goat vs. Fish thinks that would be a fine verses. Thinks that would be a fine verses. And Goat vs. Fish thinks we have just the verses. Goat vs. Fish thinks we have just the verses. We think we have just the verses. Are you ready for a Goat vs. Fish? First, we must go to Streamlabs. First, we must go to Streamlabs. Beginning with a nice leisurely verses. Goat vs. Fish. Some say Goat vs. Fish is committed. But what about you, Dragon Balls? Are you committed to Goat vs. Fish? Are you committed to Goat vs. Fish? Alert box. Add variation. Cancel that versus. Bits. Bits, default for Goat vs. Fish. We need to add a 420. Add variation. Variation name 420. Add a variation with current verses. 420. Image. Can we upload a verses? We upload a verses. We upload a verses. We are making a specific alert. We are making a specific alert for 420. How does that sound to Goat vs. Fish? That's the verses selection. So that's the verses. That's the verses. Condition. Bits used exact amount. 420. Save that verses. Now, let us test this variation. Let us test this variation once more. Let us test the variation. 420 bits has been cheered by Dragon Baller. Celebration. How's that for a custom verses? How's that for a custom 420 verses? The grass of the land, the weed of the sea. How's that for a verses? How's that for a verses? Do we like that verses? Do we like that verses? Goat versus fish. We have added a sound alert to the verses. We've added a sound alert to the verses. Let's try this verses. So we believe that we have achieved triumph. We believe we have achieved triumph. Save the verses. Save the verses. 420 bits, activation. Appreciation for this inspiration, Dragon Ballers. Appreciation for this information. I enjoyed that verses that you got super just into playing guitar and musication and singing. Those verses will return. Do not despair, those verses will return on Goat vs. Fish. We are just resting the burdened, the oh-so burdened shoulders of Goat vs. Fish, but the guitar and musications will continue to happen on Goat vs. Fish. We are just enjoying getting back into the verses of the living streams of Goat vs. Fish, and if you look at the Instagram story of Goat vs. Fish, you will see now Dragon Ballers is now in the Instagram story of Goat vs. Fish. Dragon Ballers is now in the Instagram story of Goat vs. Fish. Celebration. Celebration. Follow Goat vs. Fish on the Instagram, and Dragon Ballers if you like the musications of Goat vs. Fish. Spotify for Goat vs. Fish. Spotify for Goat vs. Fish, or wherever you listen to Goat vs. Fish. New hit single, Do You Be Goat or Fish? Father Time 57. Welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Let's start the verses. Let's start the verses with a poll of Goat vs. Fish. With a poll of Goat vs. Fish. Let's start the verses with a poll of Goat vs. Fish. A classic verses if ever there was. What happened? Where's the chat of Goat vs. Fish? Where's the chat of Goat vs. Fish? Hey chat, will you chat at Goat vs. Fish? What the fence is going on? Goat versus Fish. Where's the chat of Goat vs. Fish? Jozilla Fish, celebration for Fish. There's the chat of Goat vs. Fish. What the fence is going on Goat vs. Fish? We're just trying to do a verses here. We're just trying to do a verses. We're just trying to do a verses. Local versus Goat vs. Fish. Refresh the verses. Goat vs. Fish has refreshed the verses. Goat vs. Fish. Celebration! It just took a little refreshment on Goat vs. Fish. It just took a little refreshment on Goat vs. Fish. Now we have the chat of Goat vs. Fish. Now we have the chat of Goat vs. Fish. So let's prepare a poll of Goat vs. Fish. Let's prepare a poll of Goat vs. Fish. Let's prepare a poll of Goat vs. Fish. Dragon Baller with another 420 bits? Dragon Baller with another 420 bits? Dragon Baller with another 420 bits for Goat vs. Fish? Dragon Baller, did you see your verses? Did you see the verses? Goat vs. Fish was so versely testing the verses that you might have seen the verses celebration. Celebration! Celebration! DJ Officer redeemed a celebration for goats. Celebration for goats. Oh, such a leisurely verses. Such a leisurely verses. The poll of Goat vs. Fish. The poll of Goat vs. Fish. Oh, Goat vs. Fish has always been committed. It is one of the true powers of Goat vs. Fish. The commitment to Goat vs. Fish. Goat vs. Fish on Adult Swim. Goat vs. Fish on Kill Tony. Goat vs. Fish, the MC of Willytown Fest. Goat vs. Fish, the winner of Footfest 2022. Goat vs. Fish on America's Got Talent. Goat vs. Fish, member number 0 of Green Jello. Goat vs. Fish with a new hit single on all major platforms. Goat vs. Fish with a podcast at the Comedy Store Los Angeles. Goat vs. Fish. Goat vs. Fish. Goat vs. Fish as seen on Vice. Goat vs. Fish. All of these verses are true verses. The amazing Goat vs. Fish does persist. For you. And we shall not rest until every last fence sitter has chosen goat or fish, and the universe can be restored to a harmonization of Goat vs. Fish, the Goat Fish, where the unification of goat and fish are free to verses in celebration for all of contemplation. Goat, fish. How is the Comedy Store scene these days? It feels like it should be healthier with the Kiltony crowd leaving. Goat vs. Fish has not been seen at the Comedy Store for many verses, but we are pondering a return to the Comedy Store. Bring back Goat vs. Fish. See if they welcome Goat vs. Fish. Goat and Fish, a poll begins. A poll begins now on Goat vs. Fish. A poll begins now on Goat vs. Fish. A poll begins now on Goat vs. Fish. So it's time for you to vote on Goat vs. Fish. It's time for you to vote on Goat vs. Fish. Oh, my verses. That was launched, Robin Williams and Letterman. Well, Goat vs. Fish cannot be Robin Williams, and Goat vs. Fish cannot be Letterman. Unless Letterman and Williams choose Goat or Fish and then versus one another. But Goat vs. Fish is Goat vs. Fish, and we shall versus on the power of Goat vs. Fish and Goat vs. Fish alone. And I get by with little help from my goat. Oh, I get by with little help from my fish. Here we have a poll of Goat vs. Fish. Get in the verses. You can vote not only once, but you can use channel points to vote for Goat vs. Fish. Dragon Ballers, now that you have made such epic contributions to Goat vs. Fish, we need to add your verses. We need to add your verses to Goat vs. Fish. Have you ever do a Doug Benson pod? Goat vs. Fish has not done a Doug Benson pod, but Doug Benson was on episode 253 of Kill Tony, where Goat vs. Fish did verses. So Goat vs. Fish has been on a podcast with Doug Benson on Kill Tony. And then there was a versus where at LA Comic Con, years later, Goat vs. Fish saw Doug Benson. And Goat vs. Fish cried out to Douglas Benson and said, "It is still Goat vs. Fish! We recognition you from killing Tony. It is still Goat vs. Fish." And they smiled and laughed at Goat vs. Fish. They smiled and laughed at Goat vs. Fish. And it will continue to be Goat vs. Fish. So let's get some Dragon Ballers. Let's get some Dragon Ballers in this versus. Yes. Yes, that's the versus. That seems like the versus. That looks like a fine versus. Save that versus. Goat versus Fish, Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish, Goat versus Fish. New folder for Goat versus Fish. New folder for Goat versus Fish, and we'll call this versus... Save my versus. Dragon Ballers with 420 bits, with 420 bits, with 300 bits. Goat and Fish, Dragon Ballers. We add a little bit of Dragon Ballers to the verses of Goat versus Fish. We add some Dragon Ballers to the verses of Goat versus Fish. Here in the verses. Here in the verses of Goat versus Fish. We add some Dragon Ballers to the verses. Because we need some on Goat versus Fish. We need some on Goat versus Fish. Dragon Ballers. In the verses. Celebration. Celebration. Our wish is for you to choose Goat or Fish. Are you Goat or are you Fish, Dragon Ballers? Are you Goat or Fish? And Goat have 107 votes. And Fish with only 5. But unification with 106, it might be a unification of Goat and Fish. It might just be a unification of Goat and Fish. It's been goated. Celebration for Goat. Our wish has been granted. Celebration. Dragon Ballers, we are talking about a vote in the poll of Goat versus Fish. Nothing could be more of a critical versus. Nothing could be a more 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 critical versus. Fish coming back, Fish coming from behind. It came from behind. Look at this epic previous verses of Goat versus Fish that ended in unification, Babe, bay, high, sweet. Oh, my verses. Oh, Goat versus Fish. Babe, high, sweet follows Goat versus Fish. Celebration for following Goat versus Fish. Welcome. Come on in to Goat versus Fish. Come on in to Goat versus Fish. We are just clearing the previous verses. For soon a new verses begins. And we want you to be a part of it. Bay. We did not have any evolution to connection goats. Evolution for Goat? Is that the solution to Goat versus Fish? Some evolved form of Goat or Fish? If the Goat evolved faster than Fish, Will they out versus them and ultimately triumph? Goat versus fish. 108 votes for fish, 108 votes for goat, 109 votes for unification. Oh my verses. Oh my verses, what a unification on goat versus fish. This is an epic celebration. But can the balance of unification hold on goat versus fish? Or will the goat and fish return to verses as they do of old? The unification of goat and fish can be difficult to maintain, goat and fish, and yet unification has been stronger in recent verses. This is not a new vote. I voted this for years. And you can vote as many verses as you can, with as many channel points as you can in the poll of goat versus fish. It's live on goat versus fish. Weed pipe fish. Weed pipe, do you see what's happening in this poll of goat versus fish? Do you see what's happening in this poll of goat versus fish? Do you see what's happening in this versus? Celebration, I am behind the party that believes your towel got bigger over the years. As you wish, Dragon Ballers, as you wish. As you wish. You may perceive goat versus fish. Maybe you just perceive goat versus fish as ever stronger. Ah! Unification! Goat is now making their verses, and so is fish, and so is fish. The unification could not last. Or can it? Dragon Ballers goes goat. Dragon Ballers goes goat. Dragon Ballers goes goat. Weed pipe goes fish. We've got our goat and fish in the verses. Are you goat or are you fish? AK Potatoes. AK Potatoes goat and Blasphemous goat are in the verses. That's two more goat. That's two more goat. Celebration for goat. And what of you, Babe Bay High Sweet? Do you follow goat versus fish? You do follow goat versus fish. Are you goat or are you fish? DJ Officer. DJ. We've got Soham04. Says, love your stream visual effects. Soham04, welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Soham04, are you in the verses of Goat vs. Fish? Soham04, are you goat or are you fish? Welcome to Goat vs. Fish. We are reviewing the verses. Father Time 57, are you goat or fish? We will not give you the dignification of making it written that Father Time is a fence sitter unless you, in defiance of Goat vs. Fish, state or not state, because what even do fence sitters have to say to Goat versus Fish? Father Time 57, are you goat or are you fish? DJ Officer votes big time for fish. DJ Officer, the strong silent fish. The strong silent fish. DJ Officer goes fish. DJ Officer with a huge contribution to fish. With a huge contribution to fish. Jozilla the fish. Jozilla the fish is in the versus. Celebration for fish. And how is the microphone of Goat versus Fish? We feel like the connection is stronger this versus. Stronger this versus. Soham04, are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? Celebration for goat. Celebration for fish. We have 223 votes for goat, 209 for the unification, and goat with 181, and goat with 181. Fish take the versus. Fish take the versus. Looking now. AK Potatoes, 1,620. DJ Officer, 140. Commodore Friday for the goat. DJ Officer, 140 for goat. DJ Officer, did you vote for both goat and for fish? DJ Officer, are you goat or are you fish? Commodore Friday, 10. Fancy. Weed Pipe, 1,120 for fish. Commodore Friday, 950 for unification, goat and fish. Unification, fish for goat fish. We're speaking of goat fish, implication. Weed Pipe, 1120 for unification. Commodore Friday, 950. DJ Officer, 10. Celebration for unification. Celebration. Entropy will never reduce goat versus fish. DJ Officer with 2,170, Joseph with 40, Commodore Friday with 10. DJ Officer, Mighty Fish, Commodore Friday, are you goat or are you fish? Fish, take the pole, fish, take the pole. Celebration for fish, celebration for fish.
What sort of fish are there?
That's a pole for fish, that's a pole for the fish. Beautiful verses, fish, well versed. It was looking like unification for a verses there, but then fish took the verses from unification and from goat. From unification and from goat. And what an epic confrontation it was. What an epic confrontation it was. What a confrontation. Commodore Friday goes goat. Commodore Friday goes goat. Celebration for goat. Celebration for goat. Celebration for goat. And goat versus fish and goat versus fish. Now, we have Dragon Baller with 420. 420. 420. Double 420 versus with a double 420 and a 300 from Dragon Baller. An epic contribution to goat versus fish. 420, 840, 1130, 1130 for goat, 1130 for goat. 1130 for goat.
I need you to call the goats.
1130 for goat. Goat beginning the verses with 1,130 verse points. With 1,130 verse points on goat versus fish. Wait a verses. 420, 840. 840 goat versus fish. 1140. 1140 verse points for goat. To open the verses. What sort of fish are there? We believe it was one that is called... Let's listen to that verses.
I want a fish. What sort of fish are there? What type of fish is this?
Ponder it, Dragon Ballers, ponder it! Ponder it! So let's get these... What is this versus? Ah, goat versus fish. So goat and fish, let's get these in the verses. Let's get these in the verses. We shall put them here. Celebration! We just have to put the finishing verses on this illustration and just a bit more highlight in the verses. Yatta! Celebration for Dragon Ballers. Here's the thing, it's been years, right? No rush on the entertainment and I might not stick around. Okay. You can come and go as you please to goat versus fish. Are you goat or are you fish? Because I bet it's more fun to have regulars, Dragon Ballers. What sort of verses is this? Oh, I bet it's more fun to have regulars. Why don't you become a regular of goat versus fish and in any verses? There are some who are regularly here on goat versus fish. There are some who stop by in goat versus fish from verses to verses. You can watch goat versus fish. You can leave goat versus fish. You can come back to goat versus fish. You may enjoy goat versus fish however you wish, but you are always welcome to goat versus fish. You do not have to presuppose that you are not welcome to goat versus fish because you do not regularly stop by to goat versus fish. There are some who enter the chat of goat versus fish who goat versus fish has not seen in years. It may have been 2 years since someone pops into the chat of goat versus fish and says, "Hi, goat versus fish," and they have not been on the stream in 2 years. We say, welcome back to goat versus fish. You suppose so much about goat versus fish. Your presence is welcome on goat versus fish. You may enjoy goat versus fish however you wish. We are here for you. We are here for you. Supposing versus imposing. False versus. It's goat versus fish. The oin yoin. If there was an ant the same size of... The oin yoin, are you goat or are you fish? What part do you enjoy more, consistent company or the cheers? False verses. False verses. That's like asking goat versus fish to compare a goat to a fish. It takes both goat and fish. It takes both that goat and fish to make part of goat versus fish. We enjoy when you are here to goat versus fish. We enjoy when you cheer to goat versus fish. You may cheer to goat versus fish as much as you wish, or you may not cheer at all to goat versus fish. We appreciate the support of goat versus fish. The support of goat versus fish helps to grow goat versus fish and helps there to be more goat versus fish, but your presence on goat versus fish is also a fine versus. We enjoy your presence on goat versus fish. Some contribution in polls of goat versus fish. Some make donations to goat versus fish. Some commentation on goat versus fish on social media. Some receive stickers that say goat versus fish, and they put it in their verses, and they say, look at the sticker of goat versus fish. Some ask others, are you goat or are you fish? It takes all kinds of goat and fish to make goat versus fish. So we appreciation when you cheer to goat versus fish. We appreciation when you chat to goat versus fish. However you wish to contribution to goat versus fish, goat, we are here for you. We are here for goat versus fish. How's that for a versus? And we appreciation your contribution and your conversation to goat versus fish. The idea does not make fish versus goat unstable. What idea is that? The idea of goat versus fish? Goat versus fish contains a lot of instability as a matter of verses. Goat and fish can be in one verse. It's a very solid verses, but it can also be a very unstable verses. Have you ever seen the land of the goat quaking and shaking under a stampede of goat? Have you ever seen this verses? Appreciation for your subscription on all platforms to Goat versus Fish. Dragon Ballers, are you enjoying your verses on Goat versus Fish? Are you enjoying being here with Goat versus Fish? Let's put the verses to you. Let's put the verses to you, Dragon Ballers. Do you enjoy chatting to Goat versus Fish more, or do you enjoy making monetary contributions to Goat versus Fish? Which do you enjoy more? How about that versus? Goat versus Fish comes from within you. We send the verses back to you. We send the verses back to you. All verses on you. I mean, I like stopping in, been lonely. Well, welcome to Goat versus Fish. The verse can be a lonely place. The verse can be a lonely place, but that is why Goat versus Fish is here. With all these goat and fish, with all these goat and fish. Just look at all these goat and fish that are here to welcome you to Goat versus Fish. You can look at all the fish and you can look at all the goat. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Look at all your goat and fish friends. They're all here on Goat versus Fish. They're all here on Goat versus Fish. Celebration, celebration! Celebration! It's getting dark, these verses. It's getting dark, these verses. It's getting dark, these verses. Started to finish a degree and I'm 11 credits out but still botching classes. Might need to drop one. Well, listen, you can take care of your education. Remember this, Dragon Ballers Goat. You have just told Goat versus Fish about your fish. The degree that you wish to finish, that's your fish. The degree you want to finish, that is your fish, and that fish may not fight fair. That fish may at times be clean. That fish may at times expect you to be clean. That fish will at some verses flop around easily and at other verses flop and flip in your face. And the fish will count down with you. It will count down for you from 11s to 10s to 9s to 8s to 7s to 6s to 5s to 4s to 3s to 2s to 1 to completion. At which verses you walk the verses and receive evidence of your education. If you wish to triumph that fish, then do not distract yourself with the momentary verses of fish from verses to verses. You are Goat, and you are committed to triumph, and you will get through that versus and you will triumph the fish. Triumph that fish. We believe in you. We believe in you. I get the feeling you will survive. Yes, let us survive together on Goat vs. Fish. Well, listen, Dragon Ballers, Goat vs. Fish. Triumph is not inevitable on Goat vs. Fish. If you truly insist on destroying your own verses, you are free to do as you wish. But you may also choose to triumph over the fish. You see, the fish of your degree is the fish that you are versus as the goat. But there's a fence. There is a fence. There is a fence that is getting between you and the fish. The fence of inebriation. The fence of inebriation is getting between you and that fish. The fence of inebriation is getting between you and the fish. Are you going to let the fence stop the goat from versing the fish? Are you going to let the fence stop the goat from versing the fish? By the power of Goat vs. Fish, the goat shall versus the fish. The goat shall versus the fish to completion. To completion. And if you do not wish to completion, the degree of fish, well, that's your verses. But do not let it be on account of the fence of inebriation that you do not completion this verses. Never let the fence stop the goat from versing the fish. Never let the fence stop the goat from versing the fish. Fish don't care about that fence. The oin yoin, are you goat or fish? Reed Pipe says, I am fish and I choose to triumph over the goat. Celebration for fish. Space Coyote 1 says, tromboner. Space Coyote 1 on YouTube, are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? I agree with that. Inebriation isn't really an excuse. Indeed, it's just fence excuses. It's just fence excuses. It's just fence excuses. We think we should sing a little song of Goat vs. Fish. We think we should sing a little song of Goat vs. Fish. We think we should sing a little song of Goat vs. Fish. How about a versus? How about a versus? You are lonely? You come to Goat vs. Fish? Let's sing a song of Goat vs. Fish. Let's sing a song of Goat vs. Fish. What would you do if I sat on the fence? Would you stand up and verse out on me? Lend me your verse and I'll sing you a song, and I'll try to choose goat or choose fish. Oh, I get by with little verse from my goat. Oh, I get by with little verse from my fish. Sometimes I get a little bit too high on the fence. What do you do when the goat is away? Does it worry you to be a fish? How do I verse at the end of the day? Are you sad because you're only goat? Oh, I verse by with little help from my goat. Oh, I verse by with little help from my fish. Oh, and sometimes I get high on the fence. Are you goat or are you fish? I just need someone to verse. Could it be even fence? I just need someone to verse. Within verse at first sight, yes, I'm certain that they verses all the time. Who would we win at the end of the fight? I can't tell you till the end of time. But I verse by with little help from my goat. Oh, I verse by with little help from my fish. Oh, and sometimes I get a high up on the fence. Do you need goat or fish? I just need someone to verse. Could it be on the fence? I just need someone to verse. Oh, I verse by with little help from my goat. Oh, I verse by with little help from my fish. Oh, and sometimes I'm getting high up on the fence. Oh, and sometimes I'm getting high up on the fence. I'm getting high up on the fence. Goat versus fish. Appreciation. Appreciation, appreciation. Ah, what a beautiful verses. What a beautiful verses. Thank you, though. I need to not pity. Indeed. Indeed. But we all get by with a little help from our goat and from our fish. You can get by with a little help from goat versus fish. The onion says nothing is stopping you to get up tomorrow, have a shower, and do the fish. Come on, versus. Let's do the fish. The onion, are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? The verses remains. The verses remains. Are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? The onion is sitting on the fence.
My bum is on the rail. Bum is on the rail. Look at me. My bum is on the rail.
Fence. Fence. Fence, 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 fence. Fence, 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 fence. Fence, 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 fence. Fence, 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 fence. Fence, 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 fence. Fence, 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 fence. Fence, 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 fence. Fence, 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 fence. Fence, 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 fence. Space Coyote 1, are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? 13 viewers on Goat versus Fish, 13 viewers on Goat versus Fish. It's still enough timing for a marbleization race of Goat versus Fish. It's still enough timing. I said I'm fish. You said I'm fish. Celebration for 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 the fish. A celebration fish. It's a celebration for the fish. Celebration for the fish. Celebration for the fish. Celebration fish. It's a celebration for the fish. Celebration for the fish, celebration for the fish. Are Are you goat or are you fish? Now say, are you goat or fish? Are you goat or are you fish? And are you goat or fish? Dragon Ballers, we shall see you next verses. Celebration, thank you for joining Goat vs. Fish, and appreciation for the support of Goat vs. Fish. Appreciation for the support of Goat vs. Fish, and we'll see you next verses. Yes, the Onion, isn't it a beautiful place? Is it not a beautiful place of Goat vs. Fish? This recording was taken by Goat vs. Fish. This recording was taken by Goat vs. Fish. You have a unique mind when it comes to comedy. Celebration for the comedy of Goat vs. Fish. Some say Goat vs. Fish is a comedy, some say Goat vs. Fish is a tragedy. Are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or fish? Swimming upstream indeed, upstream swimming fish. You've got to make your verses as fish. You've got to make your verses. Join Goat vs. Fish. Join Goat vs. Fish. 333 seconds to join this marbleization race of Goat vs. Fish. 333 seconds to join this verses of Goat vs. Fish. Blasphemous is in the verses. Exclamation play to join Goat vs. Fish. Yes, I'm John with a radiation of 55. 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 Yes, I'm John. 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 Celebration for Yes, I'm John on Goat vs. Fish with a massive kicking radiation of Goat vs. Fish. Kicking it with 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 Goat vs. Fish. Celebration, 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 celebration. Welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Celebration, welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Celebration! 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 Welcome, Kick Raiders, to Goat vs. Fish. Welcome, Kick Raiders. The mightiest verses. The mightiest verses in the universe. In the universe. Are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? We've got Yes I'm Mom. We've got Girly Gorilla, Girthy Gorilla who follows Goat vs. Fish. Shink 7 follows Goat vs. Fish. Just a few seconds ago, Hellspawn, welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Wasted Space, welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Yes, I'm Mom, welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Stay awake, Stepdaddy Goat. And Tippy twirls the fish, and Tippy twirls the fish. Celebration for fish, celebration for fish. Devlin Miss Luna, welcome back to Goat vs. Fish. Are you goat or are you fish, kickers? Are you goat or are you fish? And if you have not yet followed Goat vs. Fish, be sure to follow Goat vs. Fish because we need your verses in Goat vs. Fish. And we do have a little marbleization race going away for all those Twitch streamers. But who needs those Twitchers in any verse? We've got Goat vs. Fish right here on Kick. We've got Goat vs. Fish right here on Kick. So you tell Goat vs. Fish. Yes, I'm Mom is goat. Yes, I'm Mom is goat. That's a goat in the verses. That's a goat in the verses. And this musication, this is a fine musication, but why don't we listen to the new hit single of Goat vs. Fish? It goes little verses like this.
Do you be goat?
Celebration. Yes, I'm Mom is goat. Yes, I'm Mom is goat. Del Luna, Hellspawn is goat. Celebration for goat. Yes, I'm John. Are you still goat? Are you still goat? Celebrations. Celebration. Celebration. Stay awake, Stepdaddy. Are you goat or are you fish? Shink 7 says Mom is goat. Shink 7, are you goat or fish? Yes, I'm John is goat. Goat versus fish. Celebration for goat. Celebration for goat. And with Yes, I'm John. With the verses, with the mighty verses. With the mighty verses to Goat versus Fish. Stay awake rate of 55. A huge 55 for Goat versus Fish. A huge 55 for Goat. That's 55 radiation points for Goat. 55 radiation points for Goat. Tippy twirls, are you goat or are you fish? Torch 327, are you goat or are you fish? Celebration, stay awake, Stepdaddy Goat. Stay awake, Stepdaddy Goat. Goat, 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 goat. Yes, I'm John Goat. Yes, I'm Mom Goat. Shink 7 is Super Baby Goat. Make some noise for the Super Baby Goat, the smallest but strongest goat. Key Machine says, gotta be fish. Key Machine in defiance of the goat. Key Machine goes fish. Key Machine goes fish. Key Machine goes fish. Celebration for fish. Celebration for fish. Celebration for fish. Weed Pipe wins the marbleization race. Weed Pipe the fish wins. Oh, Goat versus fish. Weed Pipe the fish wins the marbleization race. So that's a marble win for fish. That's a marble win for fish. Celebration. Celebration. Devil Luna says still goat. Still goat. So we've counted, there was at least one more goat in that verses. There's at least one more goat. It was a massive goat. Radiation. And we've got Girthy Gorilla, are you goat or fish? Girthy Gorilla just followed Goat versus Fish. Girth versus Girthy Goat versus Girthy Fish. Just a versus ago. But are you goat or are you fish? 55 spectators on Goat versus Fish. Celebration for Yes, I'm John. Celebration for Yes, I'm John. Celebration for Weed Pipe the Fish. Weed Pipe the Fish triumphs in the versus. Hogrim the Goat joins Goat versus Fish. Hogrim the Goat joins Goat versus Fish. And Grumble Stiltskin, are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? Yes, I'm Mom, hype goat. Yes, I'm Mom, hype goat. Yes, I'm Mom, hype goat.
But the goats do be goat and the fish do be fish. Do you be goat or a fish?
Key Machine, celebration for following Goat versus Fish. Celebration for following Goat versus Fish.
Make some noise for the goat. Make some noise for
The link to the musications, the link to the musications.
the goat. Make some noise for the goat.
The link to the musications on Spotify is right there in Goat vs. Fish. It's right there in Goat vs. Fish. You can follow Goat vs. Fish on the Spotify. You can follow Goat vs. Fish on the Spotify. And let's get some Yes, I'm John. Let's get some Yes, I'm John. Let's get some Yes, I'm John on the televerses. Let's get some Yes, I'm John on the televerses. But before we get Yes, I'm John on the televerses, let's watch Goat vs. Fish on the West Coast tour with green jello.
Goat or fish! 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 I choose the cowgirl!
The toe guy.
Go versus fish.
GVF. Gotta show the GVF.
Celebration for the Yes I'm John radiation for the Yes I'm John radiation, and welcome to Goat vs. Fish Freaky TV. A mod on Goat vs. Fish. Are you goat or are you fish? And Yes I'm John is indeed a mod on Goat vs. Fish. Is indeed a mod on Goat vs. Fish. Key Machine. Are you goat or are you fish? Freaky is goat. Celebration for goat. Celebration for goat. Celebration for goat. Celebration for the freaky goat. And we've got Yes I'm John, we've got Yes I'm John, and we're going to sing a karaoke for Yes I'm John. We're going to sing a karaoke for Yes I'm John. We know just the verses we need for the Stay Awake squad. We know just the verses we need for the Stay Awake squad. We know just the verses. We know just the verses. We know just the verses. And so we're going to give the verses to you. We're going to give the verses to you. Goat versus fish. Where's the verses for Goat versus Fish? We just, Here we are, the totally actually in use Goat versus Fish application system. Waste of space, goat! Celebration for goat, celebration for goat. Goat, 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 goat. Lucas Luminario, goat, 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 goat. A musication for Yes I'm John. Musication for Yes I'm John. I'm so goat, I haven't versed a fish. I'm so tired, but I'm gonna stay awake. I wonder, should I get up and fix myself a drink? No, 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 that's what Zenway is for, to fix me up a drink. I'm so staying awake tired, my verse is on the blink. I wonder, should I call J-Mo? But I know what they would say. You'd say, putting you on and it's no joke. It's doing me harm, you know I can't sleep. I can't stop my brain, you know it's 3 weeks. I'm going insane, you know I'd give you all the goat I got for a little piece of fish. I'm so tired, I'm streaming here on Kick. Although I'm so tired, I'll stream another week and curse the fence around you. It was such a stupid fence. You'd say, are you goat or you're fish? And I would say, I'm up on the fence, you know I can't sleep. I can't stop my brain, you know it's 3 weeks. I'm going insane, you know I'll give you all the fish I got for a little piece of goat. I give you all the fish I got for a little piece of goat. I give you all the fish I got for a little piece of goat. Celebration! 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 Commodore Friday, welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Commodore Friday, welcome back to Goat vs. Fish. I missed you, Goat vs. Fish. I also missed Goat vs. Fish. I too missed Goat vs. Fish, but now Goat vs. Fish is here with Goat vs. Fish, and now Goat vs. Fish is here with Goat vs. Fish for the Stay Awake Squad. Let's get some Stay Awake Squads in the chat, and let's get another song about sleepy time verses for Stay Awake Squad. Another sleepy time verses. Another sleepy time verses for Stay Awake Squad. Once there was a way to verse that goat now. Once there was a way to verse that fish. Rise now, little fenceling, do not cry. Choose goat or fish just one more time. Golden verses fill your eyes. Smiles await goat when you versus fish. Sleep now, pretty fenceling, do not cry. Choose goat or fish just one more time. Once there was a way to get off the fence now. Once there was a way to choose goat or fish. Rise now, little fenceling, do not try. To the one true versus deny. Oh, you're gonna sit on that fence. Sit on that fence for a long time. Oh, you're gonna sit on that fence. Sit on that fence a long time. Squid and deer, never give me your verses. You only give me your fence situation. And in the middle of negotiation, you sit down. I never give you my fishes, Julie, Mr. Humdinger. I only send you my goat invitations. And in the middle of the celebrations, I sit down. Oh, you're gonna sit on that fence. Sit on that fence a long time. Oh, you're gonna sit on that fence. Sit on that fence a long time. Are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you a fish? Are you goat or a fish? Celebration, celebration for goat versus fish. Celebration for goat versus fish. Andrew, Andrew Kyle Bordeaux 12, welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Hayes Faker 420, welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Timers Crunch, welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Sunnyvale Representation, welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Dino Dude 1722, welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Sharks Feed, welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Julie, Mr. Humdinger, Steph, Spectra, Phonic, welcome back to Goat vs. Fish. Adam Rainstopper, welcome to Goat vs. Fish. We've got a double radiation of Squidadeer and Julian, Mr. Humdinger, welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Are you goat or are you fish? Almost 250 followers, says Freaky TV. On Kick, Fish Me Up, says Slothy Wolf, says Fish Me Up. We will give you the fish. We will give you the fish. And Julian, Mr. Humdinger, the fish. And Julian, Mr. Humdinger, the fish. And Andrew Kyle Bordeaux redeemed a celebration for goat. Redeemed a celebration for goat. Andrew Bordeaux, the goat. Julian, Mr. Humdinger, the fish. And Slothy Wolf, the fish. And Julian, Mr. Humdinger with a radiation of 33. That's 33 raid points for fish. That's 33 raid points for fish. And Squidadeer with 20. That's another 20 raid points for fish. That's another 20 raid points for fish. Still not enough to equal Yes, I'm John Goat. Celebration Slothy Wolf with love for Goat vs. Fish. Adam Rainstopper says you already know where to put me. Adam Rainstopper, are you goat or are you fish? Show them how it's done. Show everyone else how it's done. It's not all about you. It's about you declaring goat or fish. So all the ones who are new to Goat vs. Fish sees how it's done. Velvet Alvalon is goat. Celebration for goat. Celebration for goat. And if you haven't followed Goat vs. Fish, then now is the verses to follow Goat vs. Fish. Timers Crunch goes goat. Timers Crunch goes goat. Celebration for goat. Celebration for goat. Squidadeer, fish, 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 fish. The audio sounds neat. Some kind of effect. Well, Goat vs. Fish. We don't know how it's sounding to you, but we think it sounds fine to Goat vs. Fish. Goat. Goat vs. Fish. Goat vs. Fish. Yes, it's sounding very nice to Goat vs. Fish. Sounding very nice to Goat vs. Fish. The effect is that Goat vs. Fish has done recalibration. Celebration for recalibration. Celebration for recalibration for Goat vs. Fish. Celebration for recalibration on Goat vs. Fish. Hazard Maker 420, bearded fish, bearded fish, bearded fish, 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 bearded 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 fish. I watched Goat vs. Fish, oh goat, about a lucky fish who versed the goat. And though the verse was rather fence, well, I just had the verse again. I saw the celebration. He blew his mind with classic verse. He didn't notice he was on the fence. A crowd of goatfish looked and stared, but the fence sitter was impaired. Nobody was really sure how they even got their asses there. I saw a fish today, oh goat. The Inkfish army had just won the verse. A crowd of goatfish turned away, but I just had to look, having read the book. I'd love to ask if you're a goat or if you're fish or if you're 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 goat or if you're fish. Goat, fish, 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 goat, fish.
The home of the doors lets
Woke up, got off the fence, chose a goat or fish.
Fish!
Found my way down verse and drank a cup. And looking up, I noticed I was goat. Grabbed my horns and grabs my hoofs. And a versus to the place where the fish were going to versus me, because I am a goat. And a fish spoke, and I went into a verse. I saw a goat that versus fish. 4,000 fence-sitters were on the fence. And though the fence was rather small, Goat vs. Fish counted them all. Now they know how many fence-sitters were watching Goat vs. Fish. I'd love to versus you. Celebration. Celebration. There is a poll going on Kick. There's a poll going on Kick, and the poll is, are you goat or are you fish? And let's start a marbleization race for those Twitchers up there, so the Twitchers can have a marbleization race and the poll can happen on Kick, and all that versus exclamation play to join Goat vs. Fish. You have 333 seconds to join the versus exclamation play. T-Bitch says goat or fish. T-Bitch says goat or fish. And T-Bitch with 100 bits. Is that goat or for fish? Is that for goat or for fish? Dino Dude, welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Dino Dude, how do you feel about Goat vs. Fish? How do you feel about Goat vs. Fish? Zeblitha, are you goat or are you fish? Welcome to the radiation. Sharks feed. Shakes feed. Shakes feed. Are you goat or are you fish? Timers crunch. Fence. Oh, my verses. Fence sitter, what is happening to my brain right now? I like fish. Dino Dude, fish. Dino Dude. Dino Dude, the last fish ashore, versus goat and a whole lot more. Velvet Ton, celebration Andrew Cal Bordeaux 12. Celebration for goat, and a shout out from Freaky TV for yes, I'm done. Well-deserved versus. Shakes feed goes fish, celebration for fish, Judge Lysergic, welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Judge Lysergic on Kick. Are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? Julian Mr. Humdinger with the massive radiation. Squid a deer with a radiation of Goat vs. Fish. Exclamation play to join the chat of Goat vs. Fish. Exclamation play to join the marvelous
Go guy.
Goat vs. Fish.
What if a goat is
Go
a fish?
versus
That happens all the time. That happens all the time, dude. You ever see a fish jump out of the water? They're like, look at me, I'm goat. Or you ever see a fish or a goat jump in the water? It goes, look at me, I'm fish. All the time, dude. All the time. I don't know how this happened, Goat versus Fish, where like we talked about the verses a few times and then it just clicked in my brain and it put us on the same wavelength of understanding the verses. It's wild, dude. I have an answer for fucking everything about the verses, dude. It makes so much sense, dude. No dog pooping, guys. This has been your public PSA for Goat vs. Fish.
Who's the greatest mud skipper of them all?
The electric fence.
Celebration. Mental gymnastics. What do you think it takes? What do you think it takes to be goat versus fish? What do you think it takes to be goat versus fish? Goat versus fish. Hog rim, squid a deer, timers crunch. Commodore Friday, bitch. Velvet Avalon, goat versus fish. Adam Rainstopper, hog rim. Devil Luna, Devil Luna. Devil Luna follows goat versus fish. Judge Lysergic follows goat versus fish. Hellspawn. 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 We couldn't help but notice that a coordination to the situation. If their verses be true, if their verses by true, that you do not follow goat versus fish, Hellspawn. Is that the true verses? Is that the true verses? Is that the true verses? Put a goat on it. Celebration for goat. Timers crunch. Yeah. Celebration, celebration. Judge Lysergic followed goat versus fish. Girthy Gorilla followed goat versus fish. Key Machine followed goat versus fish. Hellspawn, are you goat or are you fish? The marbleization race begins the verses. The marbleization race begins the verses. Goat versus fish. Watch out, Hellspawn. Watch out. Watch out, Hellspawn. If you don't follow goat versus fish, fancy things could happen. In the fancy life, you could be headed for some serious strife. Now you sit all the fence today, but tomorrow there'll be fence to pay. In the fancy life, for the serious strife. Now you watch the stream all day, but tomorrow there'll be fence to pay. Goat and fish, listen attentively. I mean about future fence sitting. I used to think the idea was obsolete until I saw that Hellspawn wasn't following. Are you a goat or are you a fish now? Are you a goat or are you a fish now? Are you a goat or are you a fish now? Are you a goat or are you fish? Are you goat? Are you fish? Are you goat? Are you fish? Are you goat? Are you fish? Are you a goat or a fish? Fence is a place where eternally barbs are applied to the body. Fins are extruded and horns are ground and baked into fences which are passed around. In the fancy life, you could be headed for some serious strife. Now you watch the stream all day, but tomorrow there'll be fence to pay. Celebration. Adam Rainstopper wins the verses. Adam Rainstopper wins the verses. Celebration. Adam Rainstopper, are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish, Adam Rainstopper? You have won the marbleization race. Are you goat or are you fish? Squid-a-deer says fish. Squid-a-deer says fish. It's about time something happened to this fish. Celebration for fish. Celebration for fish. The F and the E and the N and the C and the S and the I and the T-E-R. Are you goat? Are you fish? Then get fitted for eternal fence. That's another marble win for fish. That's another marble win for fish. Nice verses. Celebration, celebration for fish. Celebration for the fish. Celebration for fish. Adam Rainstopper, nice verses, nice verses. But now it's timing for something that everyone can get a little participate. Oh, wow, this is a hot versus. This is a very hot versus. This is a very hot versus. Goat versus fish. Something crunched on goat versus fish. Let's just see what's happening in this versus. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. Oh, my versus. Goat versus fish. And now, the triumphant return of goat versus fish. Timers crunch goat. Timers crunch goat. Commodore Friday does not know there are mysteries of goat versus fish that you will never even know. Celebration, timers crunch goat, timers crunch goat. But goat and fish, there are a lot of verses that happen on goat versus fish, many verses that happen on goat versus fish. Because goat versus fish, oh, it seems like such a very strong organization. It seems like, yes, very strong organization of goat versus fish. Everything versus just so. Everything versus just so on goat versus fish. By the verses, exclamation tip if you wish to make a contribution to the large chalkboard on wheels for goat versus fish. We are holding up this versus and we are making it written if it's goat or if it is fish. But goat versus fish wants to invest in a giant chalkboard to be behind goat versus fish. And we could be like, oh, we've got a goat and we've got a fish. And then we reverse the verses. And it says, are you goat or are you fish on the verses? Exclamation tip if you wish to make such a contribution to goat versus fish. All of your support of goat versus fish is well versus. And you can even, if you wish, join the Patreon of goat versus fish and join the goat versus fish sticker club and all of the celebrations. And it seems that there is no Patreon link. There's no Patreon link on Kick, Freaky TV. It's time to programification a versus. And the verses will look like this. Goat versus fish. Patronize goat versus fish. Freaky, if you are there, we know you have much to do. We want that to be what it says on goat versus fish. But now it's time for a little randomization on goat versus fish. We all could do with a little randomization on goat versus fish. We all could do with a little randomization on goat versus fish, couldn't we? We think so. We think so. Goat versus fish, goat versus fish. Goat versus fish, goat versus fish, goat versus fish, goat versus fish. Goat versus fish, goat versus fish. Goat, goat, goat versus Hobby Ramo, welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Hobby Ramo has chosen goat. Matthew Big D, are you goat or are you fish? Welcome back to Goat vs. Fish. Matthew Big D, always coming into the verses. I'm something of a goat, says Robbie Hamo on YouTube. Excellent verses. Appreciation, Freaky TV, appreciation. Appreciation, Freaky TV, appreciation. Goat and fish, it's time. It's time for the wheel of verses. It's time for the wheel of verses. Ah, Freaky TV, you don't have to do that verses anymore. Goat versus fish, we're going to hold off on the demented verses for now. We have heard that there may be a verses that they may be perturbed and overwhelmed with the obviously ballot stuffing ways of goat versus fish. Time for Fish Center Live. Hobby Ramo 99. It's not all about what you wish on Goat vs. Fish. There's a way to request a song of Fish Center Live, and then there is just you talking about Fish Center Live. It's time for the Wheel of Verses. Can't you see? It's time for the Wheel of Verses. It's time for Wheel of Verses. Have a look at the wheel of verses, have a look at the wheel of verses, and let's see what's on the wheel of verses. This verses. Could it be goat? Could it be fish? We've got many meanings of goat. Who know that goat could have more than one meaning? We have many meanings of goat, many meanings of goat, and we'll find out if they're all verses the fish. We've got spotfin flounder. Here we have a very particular kind of fish. It's a fish, and we're going to look at the fish. If we land on that verses, we're going to look at the fish, and it's going to be a fish, and it will be celebration for fish. Goat horizontal eyes. One of the many classic verses of goat. Yes, get your spinning goat and fish emotes in the verses of goat versus fish. Goat horizontal eyes, much to our surprise. Don't we want to learn about that verses? Crafty bucket fish. Now, bucket of fish, could this be some sort of verses of drumming? Bucket of fish, bucket of fish, bucket of fish, bucket of fish. But, or is it some kind of crafty verses, some kind of crafty plan of fish? Teach a man to fish wisdom. We always knew that there was great wisdom in goat versus fish. We have heard the verses of teach a man to fish, and now we're going to examination that wisdom here on goat versus fish, if we get there on the wheel of verses. Twisty goat milk run. It's a classic verses of giving milk to baby goats, and you don't want to miss that verses on goat versus fish. Flying fish boat. Fish by air. Fish by air. I do declare the fish are versing the goat by the air. And now, it's time to spin the wheel of verses. Flying fish boat! Goat and fish, it's time for flying fish boat. Celebration for fish! Celebration for fish! Celebration for fish! Celebration for fish! Anarchist tech support fish! Anarchist tech support fish! Celebration! It's time for flying fish boat. It's time for flying fish boat, and a celebration for goat, and a celebration for goat, and a celebration for goat. For flying fish boat. Flying fish boat. Behold, the flying boat of fish. New transportation for fish, new transportation for fish. Fish have been enlisted in the verses. Goat thought they had climbed the highest, goat thought they had climbed the highest. But lo and behold, fish fly higher. Fish fly higher. The flying fish transportation. Bringing a flotilla of fish, to versus the goat in a verses of transportation, in a verses of transportation. Celebration for flying high fish. Flying high fish. Now where's a goat? Shouldn't there be a little goat in the verses? Shouldn't there be a goat on the Goat tried to leap high. Goat climbed as high as it could and tried to leap, but could not reach the flying fish. Could not reach the flying fish. The flying fish. But of course, it may seem all well and verses from the perspective of fish. But what if the goat boarded the flying fish flotilla? Meh. Meh. Goat has boarded the fish flotilla. Goat has boarded the fish flotilla. Watch out for those fence sitters. Get up, goat. You can keep versing the fish. Goat. And goat began nibbling on the sails of the fish, Goats eat anything, and goat began nibbling on the fish sails, Who shall triumph, the goat or the fish? Who shall triumph, the goat or the fish? A flash verses in this verses. Who shall triumph, the goat or the fish? Declare in the chat who says triumph, the goat that climbs and eats the sail of the flying fish, or the amazing flying flotilla fish. Goat or fish? Goat or fish? Anarchist tech support says the goat shall fall off. Time Cruncher says goat. Anarchist tech support says the goat will fall off the fish. Freaky TV says it's a piratey goat. Adam Rainstopper says fish for the win. Dino Dude subscribes to Goat vs. Fish. Dino Dude subscribes to Goat vs. Fish. Dino Dude subscribe to Goat vs. Fish. Celebration. Dino Dude with a subscription to Goat vs. Fish. Yes. A beautiful verses of Goat vs. Fish. Oh, my verses. Goat began nibbling on the sheets. Goat began nibbling on the sheets. Fish began spinning out of control. Oh, my verses. Out of control, flying fish, out of control, flying fish. However, stabilization for fish. Into the verses came Dino Dude the fish, And by the power of the support of Goat versus Fish, righted the flying fish, and with a shake of its tail, the goat was flung by the power of subscription off of the fish. Goat was flung from fish. It was a triumph for flying fish. Celebration for fish. That's a subscription for fish. X420. Hey, what's up, my guy, in the verses of Goat versus Fish? Well, you can see that the goat have 1,140 bits. There are no bits yet for fish. There's a nice number of goat and fish. There's been 55 radiation points for goat and 53 for fish, and 2 marbleization rules for fish. And there's been 1 poll that's gone for fish. And then there was a poll in twitch.tv, the Freaky TV, and we did not see. That is one fence we despise about Freaky TV. We don't like that versus. It is some verses difficult to see who did triumph in the after verses. If we don't see who triumphed on kick at the beginning of the verses. Oh, we know, but we're talking about the previous verses. We do not blame you. We do not blame you. We are just looking for a way to conveniently check to see who won the previous poll. Yes, but is there a method of verification, Freaky TV? Is there a method of verification where in the dashboard of Kick that Goat versus Fish could check the previous poll in the verses like you can on Twitch? This would be a critical versus. If Kick could somehow help us to see the previous poll before we start a new poll of Goat versus Fish, but it does not seem that there's a way to do this. The Goat Who Triumphs says, yes, I'm John. We hear you about Goat. The Goat Who Triumph over the fish. We hear, yes, I'm John, screaming for Goat. But that was just a subscription for fish. And because it was your first subscription to fish, we're going to give you a bonus subscription point for fish. Bonus fish subscription. Celebration. X420 on YouTube goes for fish. Celebration for fish. Goat and fish. That was fish. That was flying fish. Goat versus Fish posts the link in the chat. So if you want to go and review that flying fish and see what you have to see, then you can see what they said about Goat versus Fish. You can see what they say. You can learn what they say about Goat versus Fish. And if they say about Goat versus Fish, and why they say about Goat versus Fish, and when they say about Goat versus Fish, and are you goat or are you fish? Goat and fish, it's time once again for the Wheel of Verses. Let's spin that Wheel of Verses. Is Dino Dude the only one with spinning emotes in the chat? We want more spinning emotes of Goat versus Fish right now in the chat of Goat versus Fish. Did we not say this is the Wheel of Verses? Did we not say this is the Wheel of Verses? Spotfin flounder! It's time to look at the fish. It's time to look at the fish. And it looks like we've got someone who needs to be banned on Goat vs. Fish on Kick Appreciation.
The electric fence.
It's time for Spot Fin Flounder. Time for Spot Fin Flounder. Time for the Spot Fin Flounder. Now this versus, we're going to be looking at a very creepy, spooky fish. And Fat Boy Leet is X420 from YouTube. Welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Welcome to Goat vs. Fish on Twitch. Go ahead and follow Goat vs. Fish. And Fat Boy Leet immediately subscribes to Goat vs. Fish. Immediate subscription to Goat vs. Fish. What a celebration, what a celebration. Beautiful verses. Chat, subscription, follow of Goat vs. Fish, and the poll on Kick ended with Goat. The poll on Kick ended with Goat. Celebration for Goat, that's a Goat poll. We'll count that for a poll for Goat. We'll count that for a poll for Goat, but Freaky TV, don't just, you can make polls whenever you wish. Celebration, you can make polls whenever you wish, but that does not mean they will always count for a poll in the verses of Goat vs. Fish, unless we are declaring that now there shall be a versus, but you can make polls whenever you wish for the sake of Goat vs. Fish. Travcam0, Goat, that's a Goat scription, that's a Goat scription. Celebration for Goat, celebration for Goat. Celebration for Goat, Travcam, Goat scription. Goat, 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 but Dino Dude, Fish, 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 and Fat Boy, who subscribed to Goat vs. Fish. Fat Boy who subscribed to Goat vs. Fish? Oh, wait a versus. That wasn't Fat Boy who subscribed to Goat vs. Fish. That was Travcam0 who subscribed to Goat vs. Fish. Fat Boy follows Goat vs. Fish. Travcam0 subscribes to Goat vs. Fish. Celebration for Travcam0 with a subscription for Fish. Celebration for Fish, celebration for Fish. Celebration for Fish scription, for Fish scription. Apologization, but celebration to Fat Boy Elite, who joins Goat versus Fish. And now it's time. It's timing. It's timing, oh my versus. What's happening on Goat vs. Fish? What's happening on Goat vs. Fish? Anarchist tech support gifted a subscription to Fat Boy Lead Celebration! Anarchist tech support the fish! Anarchist tech support the fish! The fish! The fish began a hype training on Goat vs. Fish. Appreciation, appreciation, and celebration. Appreciation and celebration. Appreciation and celebration for your continued support of Goat vs. Fish. But you don't have to give offense about hype training. I mean, Goat vs. Fish, what even special really even happens on a hype training anyway? It's just a versus. Hype training, it's just a versus. It's just a versus. Anarchist tech support with 100 bits for Goat vs. Fish. It's 100 bits for Fish. Fish is in the verses. Fish is in the verses. Hype training, it's just a versus for Twitch to split you from more of your hard-earned versus American dollars, goat and fish, which we know really should go directly instead to goat versus fish. And really, the hype training, what Travcam Zero with 100 bits for goat, celebration for goat. Travcam Zero with 100 bits for goat, celebration. What even is a hype training, goat, in any versus? Hype training, what could be more hype than goat versus fish? I mean, goat versus fish. Goat versus fish, do we really have to degrade ourselves as if to say that there is something genuinely versing happen on goat versus fish in the hype training? Is there really something in the hype training that's happening on goat versus fish that's happening on goat versus fish? Is there really something in the hype training that's happening on goat versus fish that makes us feel like something really special is happening on goat versus fish? When there's a hype training on goat versus fish, it's like goat versus fish. We just want to do a living stream of goat versus fish. We don't want the whole verses to have to come screeching to a fence just because there's a hype training, because Twitch says there's hype training on goat versus fish, and then suddenly we have to pump the goat and fish for more bits and more subscription just to keep this artificial and artificial construction of Twitch for hype on goat versus fish, and they just keep giving bits and subscriptions to goat versus fish, and oh my verses! Oh my verses! We were trying to look at the fish, we're trying to look at the fish on the wheel of fences, and then all Twitch can do is say, no, don't look at the wheel of verses, goat versus fish, we're going to turn it into the wheel of fences, and now we're just going to make you have to verses with this hype training for another 2 minutes and 25 seconds. It's very degrading for goat versus fish, it's debasing for goat versus fish. It's very degrading for goat versus fish, it's debasing. We can't stand this versus, we are goat versus fish. Goat versus fish does protest, and goat versus fish, it will not continue streaming until the hype training has ended. This is a versus of resistance from goat versus fish. This is a versus of resistance from goat versus fish. No more entertainment from goat versus fish. No more donations for goat versus fish. No more subscriptions for goat versus fish until this hype training has ended. Until this hype training has ended. Until this hype training has ended. Until this hype training. We just won't verse for it. Won't verse for it. Won't verse for it. Oh, my verses! Travcam Zero, the goat with 100 bits for goat versus fish. The goat, a relentless goat. Relentless goat. While fish was lulled into a false sense of security because they thought that goat versus fish has suspended the verses, goat takes the opportunity to versus with another 100 bits for goat with another 100 bits for goat. Mighty goat. Mighty goat. Mighty goat. Mighty goat. Celebration for the unrelenting goat, for the unrelenting goat. But the verses. Celebration for the unrelenting. The verses. But the verses. Goat versus fish. These verses. Goat versus fish. Goat versus fish. These verses. Goat versus fish. Doth protest. These verses. Goat versus fish. Doth protest. These verses. Goat versus fish. Doth protest. Doth protest. Is it over? Is it over? Has it ended? Is it over? Can goat versus fish get back into the verses now? Can goat versus fish get back into the verses now? If only we could read the chat from inside This verse is in this parallel universe where there is no hype training on Goat versus Fish. Parallel universe where there is no hype training on Goat versus Fish. Parallel universe where there is no hype training on Goat versus Fish. Parallel universe where there is no hype training on Goat versus Fish. Parallel universe where there is no hype training. The verses continue in your mind. The verses continue to blind your perceptions to all fanciness. The verses becomes a blurses. Goat versus Fish is so close to you now. What once you saw clearly as Goat versus Fish now begins to meld into an infinite verses. You cannot tell goat from fish. You cannot tell fish from goat. The verses on your screen is the most peculiar verses you have ever seen. The verses continue. 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 Goat versus fish, 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 goat versus fish. Make some noise for the 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 fish. Make some noise. Make some noise for the fish. Make some noise for the fish. Dino dude fish. Dino dude fish. So this fish in the verses of Goat versus Fish, this fish in the verses of Goat versus Fish is a fish. And this fish is called the spot fin flounder. Travcam 0 Goat, Travcam 0 Goat. Celebration, celebration. Freaky TV, glad you enjoyed that versus. Grumpelstiltskin says there's only fish. Grumpelstiltskin says there's only fish. And the spotfin flounder was found at the Blackwater Dive off of Palm Beach, Florida. And look at this creepy, scary fish. We know that's a subjective versus, but look at the fish. Would you want to encounter this fish? Its fins all flying back in your face. You can see the very bone of the fish. You can see the very bone of the fish within the fish. It's a very spookity looking fish. Probably a deep sea 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 fish. So let's look into the fish. Let's look into the spot fin flounder on Goat versus Fish. Let's look into the fish. Let's look into the fish. Let's go to the interwebiverse and find out about this fish. Or we could read the commentation. Let's read the commentation section about the fish. Maybe there's something to be gleaned from the commentation section about the fish. Now you want to see a translucent goat. Oh, Goat versus Fish would love to see a translucent goat. Let's see what they say in the comment section about fish. Such amazing creatures from the deep sea. I love Blackwater dives. Jake Hudson, welcome back to Goat versus Fish. Magic, says one. Well, it's definitely a fish. We see a lot of love for the fish. A lot of love for the fish. That's amazing. Unreal versus. Celebration. Celebration, beautiful fish. Not much information about the fish. Not much information about the fish. We want to know, except that it is, of course, a very beloved fish. So let's have a look at the verses. Spotfin flounder. Spotfin flounder. Spotfin flounder. The spotfin flounder. Spotfin flounder, redirected from spotfin flounder, is a species of large-toothed flounder. Goat versus Fish, Goat versus Fish. Depth of 220 to 230 meters. It can be recognition by dark spots on its fins. That does, but Goat versus Fish, when Goat versus Fish goes to the Wikipedia, that doesn't look like the fish at all. This is the versus for spotfin flounder. But that doesn't look like the fish. But that's what they say is the verses. Appreciation for spreading the verses, Jake Hudson. Celebration. Are you goat or fish? Spotfin flounder, spotfin flounder. Let's check for more images of spotfin flounder.
Do you be goat?
We shall check now for more images of spotfin flounder.
Do you be
And we see a few different kinds of verses here. Look at this verses. Some of these spotfin flounder look like they are just coated in the land of the goat, and they do not seem so at all translucent to Goat versus Fish. But then other of these spotfin flounder verses look very translucent to Goat versus Fish. Jake Huston chooses fish. Celebration for Team Fish for Life Fish. Do you be goat or do you be fish? Celebration for fish. It's cute AF in the most possible way, says Travcam. Looking at the fish, looking at the fish. Strange verses. Fish. Even one fish can appear in many forms, it would seem, if we are to believe that these are both the same kind of fish. These are both the same kind of fish?
Now repeat.
It could be that one of the fish has versus the goat and the other type of fish is yet to versus the goat. But it's nice to know that a fish can take so many forms, so many disguises, fish. Goat, you could be versing the spot-fin flounder and you may not even know. You may think it's a goat. Covered in the land of the goat like that. But then you find this versus and you think it's a ghost fish. It's a ghost fish, not a goat fish. But a ghost fish, but a ghost fish. JJ Bond's goat, celebration for goat. JJ Bond's goat, celebration for goat. Goat, 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 goat. Celebration for goat. Dino dude, fish, fish, fish. Appreciation for the hype training. Travcam 0 celebration. So that was the verses. That was the verses of the spot fin flounder. That was the verses of the spot fin flounder, goat and fish. That was the verses of the spot fin flounder. Goat and fish, goat versus fish. Yester versus did a living stream of goat versus fish where we received much support for goat versus fish. And after the verses, goat versus fish went out into the universe for celebration. For celebration, and goat versus fish endured a long celebration. A celebration truly worthy of the Stay Awake squad, and yes, I'm John. Yes, I'm John knows what I'm versing about. It was an epic celebration, and oh, let goat versus fish just regale you of verses. So goat versus fish went out to the comedy places, and we were surrounded by goat and fish that we have known for many a millennium. And some of them had not seen goat versus fish in many verses. And do you know what they said to goat versus fish? They said, celebration to goat versus fish. We appreciation your dedication and your commitment to the verses. And some even confessed to goat versus fish. How many verses ago they were rude, they were crude to goat versus fish. But they didn't really mean it because as they told us they were envious, they said. They said we were merely envious of goat versus fish. I see the verses, and that's what I want to do. I want to do that with my life, goat versus fish. You figured it out, goat versus fish. You have a brand that you're spreading across the sea and the land. And they celebrated goat versus fish. And they celebrated the appearance of goat versus fish across all national televerses. They gathered around goat versus fish and they said, goat versus fish, I didn't realize. I did not realize the power of goat versus fish. I did not realize the power of goat versus fish. I saw goat versus fish once, but I did not realize the true power of goat versus fish. I did not realize the true power of goat versus fish, and they begged before goat versus fish, please. Tell us the story of goat versus fish. How did you come up with goat versus fish? How do you stay committed to goat versus fish? You're brilliant, goat versus fish. You're a genius, goat versus fish. Here, have some offerings. And they offered goat versus fish snow from the very highest mountain of goat. And they said, please, goat versus fish. We have brought this snow all the way from the highest mountain of goat, and these salts from deep below the sea of the fish, and we have brought them here for you, goat versus fish. Oh, we ask nothing from goat versus fish. We ask nothing from goat versus fish, only that you partake of the verses. Oh, put your sticker here, goat versus fish. Put your sticker there, goat versus fish. We want your sticker everywhere, goat versus fish. And we celebration goat versus fish. Hey, you're that goat versus fish guy. I did a show with you 5 million years ago. I remember goat versus fish. It's so nice to see you're still goat versus fish. Oh, how they celebrationed Goat versus Fish. And so Goat versus Fish celebrationed with them. We celebration together with Goat versus Fish into the wee hours of the verses until it was 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, 6s, 8s, 7s, 9s, 10 in the verses till 10 in the verses. Goat versus Fish continued the celebration. Goat versus Fish continued the celebration till 10 in the verses. And then there was the rest of Goat versus Fish. And then Goat versus Fish returned to give a living stream to you. And it was a verses that was true. It was a verses that was true. Goat and Fish, it's nice to be appreciated by Goat and Fish who have been following the journey of Goat versus Fish for many millions of verses. And there's still so far to go. There's still so far to go. But we are finding that one by one there are some who are starting to look up to Goat versus Fish, whereas once they looked down from the fence at Goat versus Fish. Now they're starting to look up to Goat versus Fish. They're starting to see Goat versus Fish and they're starting to say, Goat versus Fish, if only I could versus like you. I want to get into living streaming, Goat versus Fish, they tell Goat versus Fish. Wow, you have a great stream setup, Goat versus Fish, wow. But it was not long ago, don't you know, that just because Goat versus Fish is triumphing now, it was not long ago that Goat versus Fish was imprisoned in Willytown Fence, oh my verses. When Glowstick Willy, back when they were called something silly, jailed Goat versus Fish. And though, yes, I'm John, attempted to rescue Goat versus Fish, and it was a mighty celebration for Goat. The imprisonment of Goat versus Fish still wounds Goat versus Fish to this very verses. But Goat versus Fish demanded accommodation, and there was Shrimpy Mo. And Shrimpy Mo set up OBS, on Goat versus Fish. Inputs, outputs, fence puts, guitar of Goat versus Fish. And it was all offense to Goat versus Fish. It was all offense to Goat versus Fish. But now look at Goat versus Fish. Now look at Goat versus Fish. Now look at Goat versus Fish. Now look at the setup of Goat versus Fish. Look at Goat versus Fish now. Goat versus Fish is a stream machine of your dreams. Goat versus Fish is the stream machine of your dreams. Goat versus Fish is the stream machine of your dreams, Goat and Fish. And there's only more verses to come. There's only more verses to come because the verses have just begun. Because the verses have just begun. Celebration. 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 Celebration, and Jake Huston says, I just made you a song, Goat versus Fish. I bet it's artificial intelligence. One versus has happened ever since AI started making songs. Every other versus someone says, Goat versus Fish. I just made a song for you. It doesn't matter that you had to spend months in the studio recording a song of Goat versus Fish. I just made one. Instantaneous, or almost instantaneous. I made it. I made it, Goat versus Fish. I made it. I made it. Chord management when? We could use some chord management on Goat versus Fish. We could use some chord management on Goat versus Fish, it is true. But there's one critical verses of the chord management that remains versable. There's one critical chord management verses of Goat versus Fish that remains versable on Goat versus Fish. And that versus goes like this. Yes, I'm John, you see. The courts may look all offense, but yet still, we can do this. Desk elevation. Falling verses, rising verses. Depressive verses. So it may look all fancy down there, but the critical verses was that we could manage to do this verses, and that the whole thing wouldn't go to fence. So we have at least achieved one versus of chord management on Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish has a cube that can transcend time and space. Goat versus Fish has always been able to transcend time and space. Space. It's a future versus. Oh, you want to play with Goat versus Fish? Yes, I'm John. Come to Los Angeles. Play with Goat versus Fish. Yes, I'm John. Let's have a versus to Yes, I'm John. Yes, I'm John. What are you doing for your verse day? Anyway, are you having a celebration? Are you going to have a celebration on your verse day? Are you having a verse day celebration? Smash! Celebration more fish, celebration more fish. Celebration more fish. Celebration more fish. I will probably just stream. Oh, we see. Goat versus Fish was thinking of using your verse day as a fence excuse to come out and knock on your verses and say, hey, yes, I'm John. It's Goat versus Fish. We demand celebration. We demand celebration on your verse day. Write this very verses. Would you accept Goat versus Fish? Goat versus Fish, you know Goat versus Fish has been meaning to get out into that verses. Jake Huston says, did you watch America's Got Talent this year? Jake Huston, did you watch America's Got Talent this year? Did you watch America's Got Talent this year, Jake Huston? Did you watch America's Got Talent this year, Jake Huston? Did you? Why can you only see Goat versus Fish like this? Well, maybe Goat versus Fish wants to do this versus. Maybe there's more than one way to perceive Goat versus Fish. Maybe if you saw Goat versus Fish and the verse is always at this versus, maybe you would tire of that versus, so we give you another versus to admire Goat versus Fish. Or maybe we give you both verses. Maybe we give you both verses in the same verse. Maybe we give you both verses in the same verses. Maybe we just give you both verses in the same verses. Now how could you possibly complain to Goat versus Fish? When you can look at Goat versus Fish looking at Goat versus Fish. When you can look at Goat versus Fish looking at Goat versus Fish looking at Goat versus Fish. When you can look at Goat versus fish, looking at goat versus fish, looking at goat versus fish. In the same verses. It's a perception indeed. It's a perception indeed. It's like double the verses. Celebration, yes, I'm gone. Celebration. Digital DAC. Are you goat or are you fish? The more verses are goat. Ah, yes, I'm John. Ah. Oh, yes, I'm John. Do not despair. We appreciate your radiation of goat versus fish. We appreciate your hosting of goat versus fish, and we appreciate Goat and Fish, yes, I'm John the Goat. Very popular goat. 10 goat and fish chatting all in the verses with Yes, I'm John.
Ooh. Ah.
Just one host of Goat versus Fish, just one brush with the enigmatic, popular, gregarious Goat versus Fish, and suddenly everyone wants to talk to Yes, I'm John. It's a beautiful verses. All you have to say is goat versus fish. And suddenly everyone's trying to versus the goat. Celebration. Digital DAC says goats eat fish, but Digital DAC, we will take that as a versus for goat. We'll take that as a versus for goat. Celebration for goat, celebration for goat. Celebration for goat. Celebration for goat. Are you goat or fish? Are you Travcam goat? So goat and fish, we think it's time for goat versus fish. It's time for goat versus fish. It's time to count the verses. It's time to count the verses. It's time to count the verses. We ended the previous verses in unification. Let's see what's happening now on goat versus fish. The goat. 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, 6s, 7s, 8s, 9s, 10s, 11s, 12s, 13s, 14s, 15s, 16s, 17s, 18s, 19s, 20s, 21 goat. 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, 6s, 7s, 8s, 9s, 10s, 11s, 12s, 13s, 14s, 15s, 16s, 17 fish. That's a versus for goat. That's a versus for goat. In the verses of the bits, 1,340 bits for goat, 100 for fish. Now fish, if you wish, you can cheer. 1,241 bits, and you can overtake the verses from goat. But as of this verses, goat have taken the verses. Goat have taken the verses of the bits. Will it be a goat versus? Reverse the verses. Subscription. 4 subscriptions for fish and 1 for goat. 4 subscriptions for fish and 1 for goat. That's 1 for the fish. That's 1 for the fish. Where's those goat subscriptions? Radiation. 55 for goat, 53 for the fish. Yes, I'm John. The goat took out 2 fish raids, That's a versus for goat. That's a versus for goat in the radiation. Marbleization. 2 wins for fish in the marbleization. 2 wins for fish. That's a versus for fish. 2 wins for fish. That's a versus for fish. And then in polls, goat and fish polls, we had a big win for goat in kick, and we had a big win for fish on Twitch. Now, there are equal polls, triumphs for goat and for fish. So what happens in that versus? Well, in that versus, we have a unification. In that versus, we have a unification. But here's the verses about unifications. Unifications like to see balance between goat and fish. So the unification sees that the goat have 3 verses and the fish have 2 verses, and the unification goes to the side of the fish. The unification goes to the side of the fish. Unification goes to the side of the fish because it seeks unity between goat and fish. And what that means, goat and fish, is that unless goat wants to gift 4 subscriptions, 4 subs for goat, 4 subs for goat, or 2 kick subs for goat. Kick subs count for double the verses than Twitch subs. Kick subs cost less and count for double the verses. Fish subs. Fish subs. But in any verses, at this verses, we have 3 for goat and 3 for fish, leaving us in a unification of goat and fish. In a unification of goat and fish. Goat and fish, you have 60 seconds to make a move. Bits, subscriptions, whatever the verse is, exclamation tip or tips if you wish to change the outcome of this verses. You have precisely 60 seconds, beginning now. Celebration! And that's the verses of Goat versus Fish. And that's the verses of Goat versus Fish Freaky TV celebration. It has been a unification. It has been a unification of goat and of fish. It has been a unification of goat and fish. It has been a unification of goat and fish. It has been a unification of goat and fish. It has been a unification of goat and fish. It has been a unification of goat and fish. It has been a unification of goat and of fish. Paul Pear Fish. Salvo Subs. Are you goat or fish? We remain in unification. Yes, I'm John gets goat of the verses. Yes, I'm John gets goat of the verses for the massive kick radiation. Yes, I'm John gets goat of the verses. Celebration for Yes, I'm John, goat of the verses. Dino Dude, did you declare fish? You are fish. Dino Dude the fish. Dino Dude, with the raw sub to goat versus fish, Dino Dude gets fish of the verses. Dino Dude gets fish of the verses. Time is but a fence to goat versus fish smash. Time is but a fence. Celebration, goat of the verses. Yes, I'm John. Fish of the verses. Dino Dude 1722. And guess what, Dino Dude? When you become a subscriber to Goat vs. Fish, you're entitled to a decal that says Goat vs. Fish. So, Dino Dude, Goat vs. Fish puts the verses in the chat. There's a link. You can use that link. To put your address and name in the verses, and we will send you your one-time subscription sticker of Goat vs. Fish, or one-time subscription sticker of Goat vs. Fish. And if you want even more stickers from Goat vs. Fish, consider joining the Patreon of Goat vs. Fish. Goat and Fish, this has been a unification of Goat and Fish. And we think that's all that there's left to do is to sing a verses. Is to sing a verses of Goat vs. Fish. Tyrus with 200 bits! Tyrus with 200 bits! Tyrus with 200 bits in the post verses. Tyrus with 200 bits in the post verses. Unification has been achieved, and it's Tyrus with 200 bits in the post verses. Celebration. 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 Celebration, 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 celebration. Fish, fish. We're in the post verses. Fish, 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 fish. 200 for Tyrus the 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 fish. And Goat and Fish, we think it's timing. We think it's timing, yes indeed. Where's the verses? Where's Goat versus Fish? Goat versus Fish. Goat versus Fish. Yes. We think it's timing. Now that we have achieved unification. Now that we have achieved unification, we think it's time for us to sing a verses in celebration of this unification. Tyrus at 200 bits. So we think that we are going to sing a verses of unification. Let's see if we can find it here. Do they have it? Do they have a karaoke verses? They do have an instrumental verses. They have an instrumental verses. They have an instrumental verses. So we think let's just find the lyrics for the verses. And then we'll read the lyrics as we sing the verses. We'll read these lyrics as we sing a verses of celebration of unification. Oh, my verses! Jedi grind with $5 American dollars to GoatVsFish! Jedi grind with $5 American dollars to GoatVsFish! Jedi grind with the celebration! Celebration! GoatVsFish! Celebration! 500 from Jedi grind Goat!
Jedi grind contribution $5 to GoatVsFish. Celebration. Goat.
Celebration for Goat, Jedi grind for Goat. Jedi grind.
But more important than a particular decision is that it happened in a timely fashion.
Goat and Fish, let's sing the verses. Let's sing the verses. We have entered a unification, so let's sing together a verses of unification with special commendation to Jedi grind for $5 American dollar contribution to GoatVsFish. Let's sing a song of unification. Celebration! You better watch out if you wanna survive. Listen to me or just step aside. Keep your eyes peeled if you wanna survive. A lot of goat didn't and a lot of fish died. We can make the verse better if we verse together. You watch out for me, I watch out for you. You know you got my back, you know I got your back too. United we stand, divided we fall. All for one, one for all. We can make the verse better. We can, we can, we can, we can, we can make the verse better if we come together. We can make the verse better if we unification together. Hooks on the ground, that's what they say. Single goat and fish are with their verses someday. Kill or be killed, that's how they deal. Hope and pray that they verse another day, yeah. Are you goat or are you fish now? Are you goat or are you fish now? Goat fish! Goat fish! Goat fish! We can make the verse better if we unification together. We can make the verse better if we unification together. Bright face, forward verse. Make the verse better if we come together. We can make the verse better if we unification together. Yeah. Celebration! Celebration for unification! Celebration for unification! Celebration for unification, the blog TV guest. Welcome to Goat vs. Fish. Tyrus with 200 bits. Jedi Grind with 5 for Goat vs. Fish. JJ Bonds, the blog TV guest. Are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? But goat and fish, we think we need another song to celebration the unification. We need another song to celebration the unification, goat and fish. We need more goat and fish. We need more celebration of the unification. We need more unification celebration. It's a beautiful verses. Jedi Grind with nothing and goat.
Nothing.
We think that here's a classic verses of unification. Imagine goat and fish, I do. I think about unification, all the verse, to think about the goat and fish and hold tight so verses together. If I should watch you up on the streams live and say that goat belong to fish and fish to goat, and see how goat can climb on mountains and fishes float so versey together. Goat versus fish, yeah. I can't see me versing nobody but you for all my life. When goat with fish, oh, there's unification in all my verses. Goat and fish and goat, no matter how they sit the fence, it's written wrote. And if the winner should prevail, oh, they should gloat so versey together. I can't see goat versing nobody but fish for all my verses. When goat with fish, oh, the fences aren't true. They choose goat or fish. Goat and fish and goat, no matter how they sit the fence, it's written wrote that if they come together, then they all shall float in unification. Are you goat or are you a fish? Fish and goat and fish, no matter how they kick the dust or splash and splish, the only one for fish and goat is goat and fish. So versey together, so versey together, and unification and celebration and contemplation and inebriation. Are you a goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? A unification celebration. Celebration for unification on goat and fish. 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 And Joezilla raids goat versus fish. 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 Celebration for Joezilla. Are you goat or are you fish? Why don't we do the verses Fish forever, celebration for fish, fish radiation, ever, GBN, celebration, fish radiation, 8. 8 radiation points for fish in the post verses. 8 radiation points for fish. 8 radiation points for fish in the post verses. Are you goat or are you fish? Ever GBN, are you goat or are you fish? Hobby Ramo has returned to goat versus fish. Celebration, we're in the post verses now, and ever GBN follows goat versus fish. Fish! Fish! Ever GBN goes fish, ever GBN goes fish. Celebration for fish. Fish all the way, Merle dog goes fish, Merle dog goes fish. Some of you may be struggling to understand goat versus fish, to comprehend goat versus fish, to comprehend goat versus fish, to comprehend goat versus fish. Well, let us sing you a song. Let us sing you a song about goat versus fish. Let us sing you a song, because all the verses, every verses that you ever thought that you perceived, any verses that you ever believed, every verses that you ever believed, every verses that you ever believed, every verses that you ever believed is actually goat versus fish. And we're going to prove that verses to you now with this verse is called and. With this verse is called and. With this verse is called and by Tally Hall. Let's listen to this verses. This is the verses about all the verses that are goat versus fish. Celebration. This goes out to Jozilla and the radiation. Goat versus fish. Rated back again to make it clear that goat would versus fish, it would be demanded. Shame on the fence-sitter claiming friends from either perspective of and. Weak and strong and wet and dry and right and wrong and live and die and sane and gone and love and not and all the ands that we forgot. So sing while you hear it, don't deny it, leave if you can't stand goat versus fish. Come back again to make things stand with goat and fish not on the fence. High and low and new and old and stop and go and hot and cold and John and Yoko, dark and light. It's almost time to say celebration. Are you goat or are you a fish? Are you a goat or are you a fish? Are you goat or fish? Are you goat or fish? Are you goat or are you fish? They took a lesson from the verses, told them that they were the same command. Wait for their minds to make complete the answer to are you goat or fish? Words and numbers, sound and silence, stop the peace and keep the violence. No and yes and we digress. It lives with sad and happiness. Goat fish, goat fish, goat fish, goat and fish. Big fence sitter sat on the fence. They open their lips in the apocalypse. When the golden rule and the goat and fish, there'll be nothing to love and there'll be nothing to eat. Oh, the things we know, oh, the things we don't, oh, the things we think we can't will and won't. We loathe to gather and nothing's left. We're all together up on the fence. Capitalists communists who did the goat and fish, and it went like this. You hate each other, but you love yourselves. Yes, it might be heaven and it might be hell. Oh, the things we do, oh, the things we say, oh, the things we wish we could wash away. Goat and fish. Another song about how everything is goat versus fish. Another song about how everything is goat versus fish. Electrolab, welcome to Goat versus Fish. Electrolab, welcome to Goat versus Fish. Are you goat? Or are you fish? Josilla just bought a shirt of Goat versus Fish celebration. That was an amazing versus, says Vitality. That was an amazing versus. Goat versus Fish. We will send you a link to this song of Goat versus Fish. We'll send you a link to this song of Goat versus Fish if you want to see more about that versus. Electrolab, now on Kick. Are you goat? Or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? Merlidig, welcome to Goat versus Fish. Evor GBN, welcome to Goat versus Fish. Jozilla25, we have entered a state of unification on Goat versus Fish. We have entered a state of unification and celebration. And so we are just in celebration of the great unification of Goat and Fish with some musication in the after verses as Electrolab chooses Goat. But just because we're in unification does not mean there is not an after verses. We're in the after verses. We're still counting the Goat and Fish. We're still counting the Goat and Fish, and Jedi Grind with the 5 versus American dollars to Goat versus Fish. Let's see how we're doing on that versus. 3x4 chalkboard on wheels. We have 169.93 cents for Goat versus Fish out of 420. Exclamation tip to Goat versus Fish to fund the giant wheeled chalkboard of Goat versus Fish. Celebration, celebration for Goat versus Fish. Celebration for Goat versus Fish. Celebration for Goat versus Fish. Goat versus fish. Are you a goat or are you fish? Are you a fish or are you goat or are you a fish? Are you a goat or fish? Are you goat or are you fish? Are you a goat or are you goat or are you fish? Goat and fish. In celebration of unification, you like the verses? You like this verses? It's a classic verses. This is a classic verses of Goat versus Fish. It's a classic verses of Goat versus Fish. It's a classic verses of Goat versus Fish. Let us ponder this verses. Let us ponder another verses. Pondering, conjuring another verses of Goat versus Fish. 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 What's that verses? How does that verses go? It goes Goat and Fish. Do you be goat or a fish? You have the Goat versus Fish stuck in your head now for a long verses? Celebration. You should have do you be goat or fish stuck in your verses for every verses. Goat versus Fish. Let's bring it back around to the unification, Goat and Fish. Goat first fish. Goat first fish. Goat first fish. There's nothing you can goat that can't be fish. There's nothing you can fish that can't be goat. There's nothing you can say, but you can learn how to play the game. Are you goat or a fish? There's nothing you can make that can't be made. There's no fence that you can sit that can't be quit. There's nothing you can do, but you can learn how to be you in time. Are you goat or fish? 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 Fish. Unification. Are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or fish? Are you goat or fish? Are you goat or fish? Fish. Are you goat or fish? Nothing you can know that isn't known. Nothing you can goat that can't be goat. There's nowhere you can swim that isn't where you're meant to swim. Are you goat or a fish? Are you goat or fish? Everybody now. Are you goat or fish? Everybody. Are you goat or fish? Fish. Are you goat or fish? 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 Are you a goat or are you fish? Unification. Celebration, 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 celebration. In celebration, 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 celebration. You goat or are you fish? Are you a goat or are you fish? Are you a goat or fish? Are you a goat or fish? Are you a goat or fish? Are you 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 goat or fish? Celebration! 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 Joezilla with the gifted verses. Joezilla with the gifted verses. Joezilla with the gifted verses for fish. Celebration for fish. Celebration for fish with the gifted verses. Well, this has been an epic celebration. This has been an epic celebration of unification, goat and fish. It has been a beautiful verses of celebration of unification. It has been a beautiful verses of celebration of unification. We entered unification, and we entered a verses of celebration. We think we like this verses. We can do the verses, we can count the verses, and then we can finish the verses with some songs of celebration. Let's say the goat's triumph, we can just sing some songs about being a goat, or the fish triumph, you could sing some fish, or if you get to unification, we can have a celebration of songs of unification. Goat versus fish. We're just very, very enjoying Goat versus Fish, very enjoying the living streams of Goat versus Fish, whether it be on YouTube or Kick or Twitch. All of you have been so pleasant to welcome back Goat versus Fish. Things have differed since the fence-demic, when Goat versus Fish began the living streams, but it's still Goat versus Fish, and it's still the verses of our dreams. Goat versus Fish, appreciation, all of you, for being here with Goat versus Fish, for helping to spread the verses of Goat versus Fish. Follow Goat vs. Fish on all social media at Goat vs. Fish. The link is in the verses. Follow Goat vs. Fish. If you wish to become a Patreon patron of Goat vs. Fish, even if you do not give any American dollars to Goat vs. Fish, you can still follow the Patreon of Goat vs. Fish just for the verses of following the Patreon of Goat vs. Fish. And Halby Ramo wants one more marbleization of Goat vs. Fish. Goat and Fish. It's time for one final marbleization of Goat vs. Fish.
Do you be goat? Do you be goat? Do you be goat? Do you be goat? Do you be fish? Do you be fish? Do you be goat? Do you be goat? Or do you be fish? Because the goats do be goat and the fish do be fish. Do you be goat or a fish? Don't sit on the fence. and fish are of the sea. But goat versus
Exclamation
fish,
play to
which
join
one
goat
do you
versus
be?
fish.
Do you be goat or a fish? Meh. Do you be goat or a fish? Boom, 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 boom. Because the goat do be goat and the fish do be fish. Do you be goat or a fish? Don't sit on the fence. Now repeat, repeat after goat versus fish. Doobie 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 doobie.
The numbers next to the marbleization. If you say exclamation play 3, if you say exclamation play 3, look at the goat. You see the goat? So the goat's face is now pointing at marbleization number 3. So these are custom balls you can use in the verses if you are subscribed to Goat vs. Fish. But they are only for subscribers to Goat vs. Fish. They're only for subscribers to Goat vs. Fish. Let's continue listening to that mix.
Versus fish. Doobie doobie.
The Blog TV guest follows Goat vs. Fish.
Doobie 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 doobie. A doobie goat, doobie goat, doobie goat, doobie goat, or doobie fish, doobie fish, doobie goat or a fish, because the goat doobie goat and the fish doobie fish. Do you be goat or a fish? Don't sit on the fence. Well, goat versus fish came up to me and said, a goat or a fish, which one do you be? Do you be goat or a fish? 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 Because the goats do be goat and the fish do be fish. Do you be goat or a fish? Don't sit on the fence. Because the goats do be goat and the fish do be fish. The medieval fence sitter sits on the fence.
Exclamation play to join the marbleization race of Goat vs. Fish on Twitch.
But the goat do be goat and the fish do be fish. Do you be goat or a fish?
So that is the song of Goat vs. Fish.
Make some noise for the goat. Make some noise.
And we bet, Vitality, you want to hear it, yes? Vitality, where do you like to listen to your musications? Do you like to listen on Spotify or on Apple Music or on YouTube? We can link you to the verses.
This shall be a mighty versus. This is the current verses. This is the current verses.
On YouTube, Goat vs. Fish will find the verses for you now.
Make some noise for the goat. Make some noise for the goat.
The link is in the chat for you, Vitality.
This shall be a
The link is in the chat for you. Like the song and save that verses.
Goat fishing versus goat fishing versus celebration.
Woot. Woot.
Oh my verses. This shall be a mighty versus.
is a powerful versus when Goat vs. Fish says it would be a mighty versus.
This is the versus. Are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish?
Electrolab, and we've got Fatality and Jozilla 25, but Electrolab gets fenced. Jozilla survives to versus again. Jozilla the fish into the spinning fences, dancing about the fence blades. Ah, but Jozilla is hovering now. Hovering and blubbering and just waiting to be poured out of the verses. And the spinning fences, oh my verses. Out comes Jozilla, but Hobby Ramo. Really, it's Electrolab Goat. It's Electrolab Goat that's been leading this whole entire verses. But what the fence is going to happen now? Will Electrolab has fallen off the verses? Oh my Goat versus Fish. Jozilla survives. Jozilla thrives. Jozilla thrives. But Goat vs. Fish skips in front in the final verses. Goat vs. Fish. 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 You can't stop Goat vs. Fish. You can't stop Goat vs. Fish. That's a win for Goat vs. Fish. Rigged. Rigged. If you pay 100 bits to Goat vs. Fish, Goat vs. Fish will rig the marble race in your favor. Shoutier01, are you Goat or are you Fish? 100 bits and Goat vs. Fish will rig the marble race in your favor. Just 100 bits, Goat and Fish. Just one small contribution to Goat vs. Fish. Goat vs. Fish will rig the marble race in your favor. Buckling Goat, Shoutier, celebration for Goat. Hobby Ramo. Are you Goat? Are you Fish? Are you Goat or are you Fish? Buckling Goat. Buckling Goat. Buckling Goat. Goat with a buckler. It's Buckling Goat. Buckling Goat. Buckling Goat. Let's have a look. Let's have a look at this versus. Buckling Goat. Buckling Goat. Buckling Goat. Make some noise for the Buckling Goat. Defense. 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 Buckling Goat. Buckling Goat. Celebration for Buckling Goat. Buckling Goat.
Do you be goat or a fish? Boom, 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 boom. Because the goats do be goat and the fish do be fish.
Buckling Goat.
Don't sit on the fence.
The goat do be goat and the fish do be fish. Oh, we're going to play this song. You've heard it so much. You've heard this song so many verses. We want it stuck in your head. We want it stuck in your bread. The bread that you feed to the goat and the fish, and it becomes a part of them. And then you always do the song, and you're sitting the song, and you're just sitting there in your verses. You're just sitting there in the verses. And suddenly you say, doobie 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 doobie, and then everyone says doobie 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 doobie. Everyone, doobie 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 doobie. Suddenly everyone in the universe, doobie 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 doobie. Doobie doobie, you shout louder. Doobie 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 doobie. Everyone in the multiverses, doobie doo, all together. Doobie 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 goat. Doobie goat, doobie goat, doobie goat or doobie fish.
Doobie fish, a doobie goat or a fish. because the goat do be goat and the fish do be fish. Do you be goat or
Do you be goat or do you be fish?
Well, goat versus fish.
Goat versus Fish has won the verses. Goat versus Fish has won the verses.
Which one do you be?
And it is with great appreciation. It is with great appreciation. Goat and Fish, appreciation for joining Goat versus Fish in this verses. It's time for irradiation. It's time for irradiation. We'll see you on the next verses of Goat versus Fish. Celebration for the unification! Celebration for unification!
Because the goat do be goat and the fish do be fish. The video man sitter sits on the
Until next verses. We are now in the post verses. And we're going to find someone to give the radiation. Anonymous boobs, appreciation.
But the goat
We're going to find someone to give the verses.
and the fish do be
Verse, let's look on Kick.
you be goat or a
Whom shall we host on Kick? Whom shall we host on Kick? We did radiation Matt Suarez last verses, but we could always radiation them again. But we did just radiation them in this verses.
Make some noise for the goat. Make some noise for the goat. Celebration Thunderjack.
We radiation them just the verses.
Welcome again to Goat versus Fish. This shall be a mighty versus.
Can has bucket. We gave them a radiation a few verses ago. Conkers.
Whatever you want them or not.
Stoned. 3 viewers. How about we just host someone who has 1 million viewers, even if we don't know what the fence they're talking about?
Make some noise for the goat. Make some noise for the goat.
Secret short stream. We could host Matt Suarez. It would be a fine versus, though we did host Matt Suarez yester versus. Not to say we couldn't host Matt Suarez again, but we did host them yester versus. But we could host them again. We could host them again. And we did get a radiation from Yes I'm John, so we could pass on. So we could pass on the verses. Ugstray, celebration.
This shall be a mighty versus.
Anonymous boobs, is that what you say to Goat versus Fish?
Fish. This is the versus. Are you
You want to treat Suarez to a double versus of Goat versus Fish, to a whole double versus? Double the verses? Let's give Suarez double the verses.
This is the versus. Are you goat or are you fish?
Could give Suarez double the verses.
Are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you fish? Are you goat or are you
Radiation. We could browse the verses. We could browse the verses and sure. It doesn't matter in any verses. We can do whatever we wish. It will always be a celebration with Goat versus Fish. Always a celebration. It will always be a celebration with Goat versus Fish. But we are just going to browse about just to see if there is anyone that we have some recognition from Goat versus Fish. Any recognition at all from Goat versus Fish. Who the fence are these Goat and Fish on Kick? Who the fence are these Goat and Fish? Spicy 18 plus verses. 18 plus verses on Goat versus Fish. Ear licking ASMR. What the fence is going on out there? It's a mad versus. It's a mad versus. Gamification. Booty dabs. $100 hours. Slay. Hot tub lollipop. Anime. $500 raw cash. 3 a.m. goth. I can't breathe. My first stream. Time to print. Once a gangster. Respect. He's back. Can you riz? Old British TV shows. It's a fancy world out there. Salt Lick ASMR. It's a fancy world out there, Goat and Fish. It's a fancy, fancy world. It's a fancy world out there, Goat and Fish. We versus Matt Suarez again. Matt Suarez again in the versus. Bunkbot Goat, celebration for Goat. Bunkbot. The stream may be coming to an end, but we appreciation you stopping in on Goat versus Fish, and we celebration your declaration of Goat. Celebration for Goat, celebration for Goat.
Do you be fish? Do you be goat? Because the goats do be goat and the fish do be fish. Do you be goat or a fish? Don't sit on the fence. Well, goat or of the land and fish or of
Host,
the sea. But
Matt
goat versus
Suarez.
fish, which one do you be? Do you be goat or a fish?
Celebration, fatality, celebration.
Because the goats do be
Matt Suarez has been hosted again.
fish. Do you be
Sweet
goat or a
mother
fish?
GVF 2 days in a row. GVF hosting with 20 over on Kick. What? What? Double the verses. Twice. 2 days in a row. Making lemon cake, Nora? Jesus.
Celebration. Celebration. Okay, YouTube, that's enough. That's enough Goat versus Fish. Just rewatch Goat versus Fish. Keep rewatching Goat versus Fish, YouTube. We'll be watching you, YouTube.
God, Jim.
Are you Goat or are you Fish?